Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Super excited to see y'all here. My name's Meg. I'm part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I am super excited to be your host and moderator for today's chat with Melissa from Sienna. Before we get into the questions and stuff, and kind of the real meat and potatoes of today's event, I just want to go over real quick some housekeeping items for everybody to know. It's just ways that you can participate and have the best possible virtual experience today. So one thing that I want to highlight is that we really value our community members, our attendees, and we want to make sure that you all are as able to participate as possible. So one thing I want to highlight is that there's a couple different ways to do that. You can come off mute to ask questions or add comments to what our speaker is going to talk about today. If you do come off mute for whatever reason, you will show up on the live recording of today's event. Now, whatever will show up is what you have displayed. So if you have your video up then and turned on, that is what will show. If you just have your display name or your avatar, that's what will show. Now, if you don't want to come off mute or you don't want to be on the live recording, you can still turn your cameras on. It doesn't matter. We're happy to see your smiling, maskless faces safely. But if you do have any kind of privacy concerns, but you still want to participate, no worries. All you have to do is put any questions or comments you have into the Zoom chat. It should be, well, it'll depend on where you drag and drop it on your screen, but you can contribute there in the Zoom chat. I'll be monitoring it and pulling questions out of there to raise to Melissa. You can also DM me if you, for whatever reason, want your question asked anonymously. Like I said, this is being recorded, so everyone will receive a link. They'll get an email about 1 to 2 business days with a link to where you can rewatch this recording on our website. Now, everybody who registered gets that, whether they're joining us or not, whether you stay for 5 minutes or you stay for the full 60, everyone will get that rewatch email. But in case Melissa drops some like amazing, mind-blowing knowledge today and you have to share it with somebody right away, no sweat. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. We are at Power to Fly. There's a couple different, there's 2 different channels. There's one that's Power to Fly Chat and Learns and one that's our main. You can head over to the Chat and Learns channel, and this video should be posted there usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of today's session. Like I said, we are on various social media that you can keep up with us on, including we are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I very much recommend that you subscribe to the YouTube channel for Chat and Learns, mostly so you don't miss events like this. It's a great way to make sure that you don't miss a recording, but you don't necessarily have to clutter up your inbox with invites and reminders for something that you can't attend. So please feel free to do that. Then what else? Yeah, we'll just get to the rest as we go. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Melissa. Melissa, I'm so sorry I didn't ask how you pronounce your last name.
That's okay. It's Precise.
Precise. Okay, I never would have gotten that, so thank you. So Melissa is a senior software engineer who has worked at Sienna for the past 7 years. She started with them as a new graduate and spent several years as a developer working on their 6500 platform before transitioning to the Wave Server product. God, guys, sorry, English is hard today. Melissa is currently leading the delivery of the latest iteration of the Wave Server platform in a microservice architecture. She's an active member of the Women at Sienna group, helping to lead professional development and outreach activities. She graduated from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, with a Bachelor of Computing, which is their version of computer science, and a Master of Science in Biomedical Computing. She's passionate about increasing diversity, her cat Jellybean, and Disney. Her personal motto is embrace your weird, and I couldn't agree more. So welcome, Melissa. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Happy to be here, and good job reading out my bio. So
Thank you. So some of those were tricky, man. Is there anything you want to add to this bio or to the information that, kind of to help people understand why you were so excited to speak on this topic about having a 5-year career plan?
Yeah, so I think for me, as I mentioned, I've kind of worked at the same company since I graduated. And what I found coming out of university, I did do a 16-month internship, but you don't get a lot of information about kind of how to run your career when you first start. And I definitely made some mistakes at the beginning of mine, some things that I would do differently. And so that's why I've become really passionate about kind of spreading that like top things to do in your first 5 years message so that people can learn from my mistakes.
I absolutely appreciate that. There are plenty of people who have saved me from a lot of heartache and headache and trouble by sharing their experiences. So thank you so much for coming on to do that with us today. Okay, so last but not least, before we jump into the questions, I want to highlight the fact that Sienna is hiring. So obviously Melissa is here as part of Sienna's team, and they are hiring. So I'm trying to grab the link for you here to where you can check out their company page. Once I grab that, I'll throw it into the Zoom chat in just a moment. Being at that, checking out that page is going to look like what you see in front of you here. The biggest thing I want to highlight for you is that the Sienna's company page on Power to Fly is where you can find out a bunch of different information. You can check out info on the company. You can click on events to see what events they are participating in, with us in the future, or also to see events that they've partnered with us on in the past. You can also check out that open jobs link right there. As you can see, it looks like 351 roles currently posted. The other thing I want to highlight is that if you are interested in Sienna as a company, especially if you don't maybe see anything on the open roles list that really lights you up or looks like it might be a really good fit for you, if you're interested in them and want to kind of keep them on your radar, there'll be I recommend that you click the follow button. So it's going to be this big pink follow button at the upper right hand corner of their page on powertofly.com. And what that does, clicking it puts you on their follow network. So it basically puts you on Sienna's radar before you even fill out an application, tells them you're interested in them, but it also lets you know when they post new roles. So it's a really great way to make sure that whether or not you're active in your job search right now, or Sienna is really the best, has a great opportunity that really fits you, you don't have to worry about losing track of these companies, whether, when it comes time to activate your job search, or, if you're just kind of curious and looking around, don't worry about, kind of forgetting about some of these great companies. So definitely check out that feature on the website. You can follow and unfollow as many companies as you like. You can follow and unfollow as many times as you like. So it's just a really great feature to use either for an active job search or just to kind of keep tabs on companies that you think you might want to learn more about in the future. All right, so before we dive into the questions, I just want to highlight for y'all. So what you see on your screen is a few of the principal themes that we're going to try and go over in today's conversation. Now, we developed these both by talking with Melissa ahead of time when we were kind of coming up with the theme for this chat, but then we also reassessed them in light of the questions that y'all submitted prior to today's event. So when you registered, everybody had the option to submit questions. We have gathered all of those and tried to arrange them in kind of a conversational format for you. Now, what this means for you is that if you are taking time out of your schedule to be here with us live, hi to people watching the recording, we don't love you any less. If you're taking the time to be here with us, we want to make sure that the time you spend with Power to Fly is well worth it. So if you want to make sure that your question gets asked, the best way to do that is to come off mute and ask it, or you can throw it into the group chat on Zoom, or you can DM me directly. The other thing to highlight is that if we are going over your question, and you want to add some context to it, or we're maybe not considering it in the in the light that you wanted it looked at, or the answer that you were kind of looking for, definitely please feel free to participate. Add more context, let us know, sing out, say, hey, this is my question, and whatever. So definitely feel free to participate. So we're going to try and talk a little bit about some ways that you can help grow your network for that first 5 years, steps to help you figure out where you are now and where you might want to be in your career, which can seem very murky, especially when you're just starting out. A little bit also about how to kind of ask for those opportunities to help you move up or move along that path that you think you might want to follow. And then we're also going to talk a bit about how to identify when it's time to leave your current position. And sometimes that can be a lot more clear and sometimes it's not. So I'm really eager to start digging in on a bunch of these questions. So Melissa, as we get started here, I want to highlight the first question that we had. I was really interested in this. This person wanted to know, how can I break down my 5-year plan so it feels achievable? How can I check periodically if I'm on track, and what frequency should I review my 5-year goals? So before we jump into this, maybe let's talk a little bit about the 5-year plan idea in case maybe people aren't familiar with it. And then we can assess, once we're all on the same page, we can kind of go back and address this question.
Yeah, so I think in terms of 5 years, especially kind of at the beginning of your career, 5 years can seem like a really long time, but it will go very quickly. And I think like when you're first starting out, you can kind of burn, a few years just kind of figuring out what you're doing. And so kind of going in knowing what you want to achieve over those 5 years can help you to focus, especially at the beginning. I know I found for myself, I kind of just wanted to do everything, and I hadn't really focused, not that you have to, but I hadn't really focused on, what my goals were, what I was trying to achieve, what I wanted to learn. And so I think having that 5-year goal, even now in my career, it just gives you kind of a path to shoot for. And when opportunities present themselves, you have something that you can kind of compare and contrast to. Does that fit in with my plans? Is it something that would be worth adding to my plan? So that kind of thing. So it kind of just lets you set up, a roadmap for yourself. And sometimes, you're going to go off trail, but it's just gives you like a compass so that you know kind of where you want to be.
I love that. Okay, so we've got questions coming in the chat. People wanting to know like what questions you should ask yourself while creating this 5-year plan, or maybe some examples of the things that you had on your first 5-year plan.
Yeah, so I think in terms of questions, you really have to figure out kind of where you are right now and where you want to go. So start by asking yourself questions like, what energizes me? So this is a concept that I really like, and it's where, maybe you write it down over a few weeks, maybe you just sit and reflect, but you think about what things do I really enjoy doing, and then kind of extrapolate what that means. So like for myself, when I asked myself this question, I realized that I really liked, helping other people. I like problem solving. I like making PowerPoint slides, which is, most people don't, kind of ridiculous, but I do. I really like sharing information. And so when I started to think about the things that I really liked, it led me more down like kind of a leadership type of role, because I really wanted to be able to help others and share information with them. But at the time that I realized that, I also had to reflect on where I was, and I was in a position where I didn't really have like the visibility to be able to share that information. So my first step when I was kind of creating my first 5-year plan was recognizing like I'm an individual contributor, which is great. Here's some of the things that I have enjoyed doing, but I haven't had as many opportunities to do them. And then starting to lay out steps to be able to do those more, but also looking at what my organization needed. So I think you kind of have to ask yourself, what do you enjoy doing? And then look at how you can take that and plug it into what your organization needs. I feel like I maybe missed a question in there, but
no, I think that's great. Okay, so to bring it back to the first question we had looked at, this person wanted to know how to break down that plan so that it feels achievable, and then how can you or should you like periodically check to see if you're on track. So let's start with how to break that down.
Yeah, so I think the hard thing about a 5-year plan, at least for me, is that you don't necessarily get to dictate the timeline, right? So especially when you're working for a company, sometimes they're going to need you to do something that doesn't fit into your 5-year plan. But I think you can kind of break it down in terms of your own personal goals. So like saying, over the next project, let's say you're working on a project, I want to volunteer to do a presentation on some sort of technical piece for other people. So like you can kind of pull something out and you can say, okay, I want to do that some point in the next 6 months. Or if you're about to move on to another project, one of the things that I would do is I would talk to my manager before that and say, hey, I'm really interested in getting more knowledge in this other area, because one of my goals was to increase my breadth. And so I knew that I didn't want to work on the same thing I had just done, even though I had done a good job on it. So I would sit him down and say, okay, one of my goals is to, see this full area that I'm working in. Can I work on something else for the next project? So kind of breaking it down into something that you can do either in the project you're about to encounter or over the next 6 months is kind of how I viewed it. And you won't necessarily be able to do that when you sit down and do your 5-year plan, because you don't always know. I know at least at my company, I may be right now, I have no idea what I'm doing next, but I may know what I'm doing in the next 6 months or year. So kind of having these small steps that are broad things like I want to be in more of a leadership position. I want to help others to learn something technical. I want to be involved in design discussions. I want to write a technical document, like kind of breaking down these small goals and then not necessarily having them in an order, but knowing what they are and then being able to pull from those when you go into your conversations with your manager about what you're going to do next, I think is really beneficial. So keeping it a little bit flexible, but knowing kind of in 5 years, for me, I would say I want to be a manager. I can see that there's these sort of 3 big milestones. I got to be good technically. I want to be in my organization. Typically, you'd be like a release prime, and then I want to be a manager. So I kind of am building towards those big ones, but with the smaller pieces that are more flexible in between.
I love how you break that down. So just to clarify, when you're talking about, reviewing these and kind of taking stock with like your manager or your team lead or whoever is your supervisor, you're saying we should be doing that. We should be self-reviewing these things more often than we're meeting with management about it, correct?
Yeah, so that's what I like to do. If I'm, especially I think at the point where maybe you're feeling like a little bit frustrated in what you're currently doing, this is when I often do it. I go back to my goals and say, okay, what I'm doing right now, that's going to help me to reach this goal. So for yourself, you want to reflect, especially when there's maybe a transition in the project you're working on, when you're transitioning between projects, when you're, thinking about what you want to do next. But then you also want to be communicating that obviously to your manager. For me, we don't have like super regular one-on-ones. So I just try to communicate with him every time it comes up. We do a mid-year and end of year. Some people meet more regularly. And I had a manager previously where we did meet regularly, and pretty much every time I would remind him, I'm looking for this type of opportunity, because they know at a larger scale what's coming, and so they can help you to really identify those opportunities. So I don't think you don't want to do it every day, but in my perspective, I don't think you can really overshare in like a one-on-one if you're repeating the same thing again, because your manager, can have 8 to 15 people. They're not always thinking of you, right? So you may mention it, one time, and then something's going to come up that they just thought of. So that's something that I found has been really beneficial.
That is a really good point. These people, your management or your team leads, they don't know what you want unless you talk to them about it. Yep. They have, not everyone is looking to climb the ladder. A lot of people just like their job and that's where they are. So you can't really make those assumptions. And you're right. Like if you don't tell them, they're not going to know. And so how can they help you get someplace if you're not even letting them know that you want to go someplace? So yeah, I love that. Now, this next question, this person had talked about they're a junior engineer with less than a year of working experience. They want to know what factors to consider when they're kind of mapping out what they think they want their career path to be, and how to measure that progress. But I thought this question could kind of apply to anybody that's new in their field. It doesn't necessarily have to be a new grad. It could be somebody pivoting or maybe a returnship of they took time off to, caregive or go to school or whatever. I kind of saw this as working, the question could really suit anybody that's new to their field. So where would you start with this? What kind of factors in the broad sense should you look at? Because obviously, the advice can change dramatically depending on the industry.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a couple of things that come to mind with that one. So I think, as I mentioned, you kind of have to start with yourself. So what are your personal goals? What do you want to measure yourself on? And that's going to be different for everyone. If you're coming into a position and you really just want to learn as much as you can learn, then measure it based on, what opportunities you've taken and what different, I guess going back to software, but like which kind of technologies you've worked on. Have you had an opportunity to try everything that your team does, which is a more general thing based on whatever team you're in. And then I think in terms of, have you made progress? It kind of comes back to the same thing. But I think one thing that's really important as you kind of move through your career is you don't necessarily want to get comfortable. And so if you're starting to feel comfortable, at least for me, like that's when I know that I'm not challenging myself. And one of my goals is definitely always to be challenged. And so one of the things that I had to learn at the beginning was kind of get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's a phrase I stole from my director, but it's one of his favorite things to say, because I think that's kind of how you measure progress. Like if you're kind of consistently moving from being comfortable to being uncomfortable, it means you're learning something every day, which I think is a really sort of generic way to measure progress.
No, I completely agree. I mean, that's advice that we give people when they're applying for new jobs too, right? It's one of those things where it's like, well, if you already meet all of the qualifications and you have all of the skills necessary for this, yeah, that's great. But are you looking for something where you're going to be challenged, or are you looking for something where you're going to come on board and then kind of plateau? And that's not to, I shouldn't put that kind of a negative spin on it, but a lot of people don't want to be bored. They're leaving their current job because they want something more interesting, or they want something different. And it's, it's one of those things you got to think about. Do you want to be the SME walking in the door, or would you rather go someplace that can teach you more and broaden your skill set or deepen your knowledge base?
Yeah, and that's something you have to decide. Like when you're making your plan, you may decide that, some of the things that you want to do personally or in your personal life are more important. And so for you, having a stable position where you know what you're doing is more important, and that's totally fine too. And that's the kind of thing you can really kind of consider when you're creating that plan. It doesn't have to just be about growing at work. It can be about growing in your personal life, it can be about starting a family, coming back, that kind of thing too. So not everyone's plan is obviously going to be the same.
Yeah. Now, we do have a good question coming in from the chat. Minji Kim is asking, what about when management denies a one-on-one with lower level positions? I've requested but got rejected because they are busy or have bigger things to do. Now, I mean, I know how I would respond to this question, but I'm not the person being asked for advice. So, Melissa, how would you address this question?
Yeah, so I think that I've been in a similar situation, and to me, that was an indication that maybe it was time for me to start looking for a new manager to work with, because really you want to be with a people manager who wants to manage people. And if they're too busy to meet with you, and maybe there's a good reason, it's just a one-off, and that's totally fine. I know especially with the pandemic and everything, there's a lot, people are juggling a lot of things. So you could always follow up and say like, hey, I still really want to meet. Is there another time that works for you? But if you're being consistently denied that opportunity, honestly, I'd probably be starting to look for something else, because you can't grow really on your own as an individual contributor. You can, but you really need your manager to back you. It's very hard otherwise, at least in my experience. So if someone's not supporting you in that way, then, I think it's worth maybe considering looking for something else.
Yeah, that's the first thing I noticed as well, was like, it's one thing if you're trying to get, like, if you're part of, a Fortune 500 company and you want to get a meeting with like the CEO or something, but whoever is your supervisor, like I know direct report is like for the person reporting to me, but like, whatever the flip side of that is, whoever is like your team lead or whoever has any kind of managerial capacity over you, like at that first level, that should be a relationship built on a lot of open communication. At least as far as I've experienced in my ridiculously weird work history, places that didn't have that open communication were not places I wanted to be very long. So, and I know that that's a very resourced position to have, and not everybody can move jobs or look around. But that's definitely something I would raise. If you're getting consistently like, kind of blown off for this, it's also something you could keep in, kind of hint about, like, if you guys do yearly like reviews or something, performance evaluations, that's the thing I would bring up, because like performance evaluations are generally for like leadership to tell employees like, here's what's going on. But it should also be like, that communication should be a two-way street. So if you're not getting like the kind of feedback that you need from your boss or from your team lead or whatever, like that's definitely something I would raise either to their boss or HR or somebody, because there's ways to do it effectively without being shitty to them, but it's still something that this is not a big ask,
No, like 30 minutes of their time, they should be able to do. And I mean, maybe in that situation, you can start to talk to other people within the company, see what opportunities there are, but it's really hard. Like, you don't want to kind of burn bridges where you are by going around them. So yeah, I think if you have an opportunity to give feedback, give that feedback. That's always important. And I've done that with my manager as well, because he also often doesn't have time and he's overworked, and I get it. So, but I've given him that feedback as well, that, I wish that we had more time to talk about career stuff. So
yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about, this idea of a 5-year plan, when you're looking at the idea of your career path in general, does your advice or your methods, does any of that change if the person involved wants to go into management eventually, or is it really kind of just the same steps?
So I think it's the same steps to create the plan. I think it just comes down to the kind of things that you want to do. And I think for myself, my goal is to be in management. So this is one that I've definitely thought about more than some of the other paths, but I kind of had two options. And this is where sometimes it gets complicated, is like, which way do you want to go? But I think if you're looking to move into management, then what you really want to kind of realize first is that, leadership isn't necessarily a role. It's not the org chart, right? It's not the title. It's kind of how you act and the way that you interact with your peers. And you can be a leader whether or not you have that management title. And I think your 5-year plan should really be about developing those leadership skills and not necessarily about getting that management title. At least for me, that's the way that I've set it up, because I think once you're, a respected leader in your team, the management part, yes, there'll be some process and things like that you'll have to learn, but that's going to come more easily. So if you're looking to create that kind of plan, I would focus more on how do you build those leadership skills versus how do I become a manager.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Look at what the skills you're going to need, rather than trying to identify the places you're going to get those skills or get that opportunity.
Yeah, because it might show up in a different way too, right? Like you might think you want to be a manager, and then there's like a project management role that comes up, or release management, or whatever it might be, and it kind of gives you that same type of role, but in a completely different way. But you've developed skills that are more like general purpose, which is very good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about, what the differences might be to this plan if you're new to an industry. Mm-hmm. This person's looking at it in terms of a transition or a pivot, but they're still in process of making that pivot. Mm-hmm. So this person says, I have 12 years of professional experience, but I'm only just now getting into tech. Do you have any guidance on developing the 5-year plan for this transition? Mm-hmm. So not all transitions happen quickly, obviously. But for people who are maybe taking more of the long view of like, well, do I want to go back to school to do this? Or do I need to go get a certification to change from, lion taming into rocket science or whatever? If you're looking, how should that 5-year plan look if it includes a transition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have made a transition as well, not quite as large of a shift. It was still within technology, but I think in that case, your 5-year plan needs to give yourself like some time to go backwards, which can be very tough when you're making a 5-year plan, to kind of accept that, when you make that transition, you're not going to be, the top performer, the person who knows the most. You're kind of starting again from square one in a lot of ways, but you have built up, for this person over those 12 years, a set of skills that you can lean on. But I found for myself, I did have to kind of build in, and it was really tough. This few months of like, I'm going to kind of go backwards, and I'm going to have to relearn everything that I thought that I knew in this new context. And then I'm going to be able to build on those skills that I already have, and I'm going to kind of shoot forward. So when creating that plan, I kind of build in that buffer for yourself so that, you're not going to be kind of, tearing yourself down because you feel like you want to be, making progress right away, because you're always going to need some time for that transition. So that's the main thing I would add, and then kind of take all the rest of the tips and go from there.
Well, and especially if you're looking at a transition, I mean, that sounds to me like a 5-year plan that you would probably readdress or update as things developed and happened along that transition. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't know about. I mean, my husband's back in school right now, and he's going to have to extend his scholastic career by like an extra semester to get the classes that he needs to take. So, knowing that there's a lot of moving parts there, that you can't control everything. Yeah, I think you're right. Building in that buffer and then consistently like reassessing.
And having those kind of more generic goals of like why you're making the transition, where you want to be, but not being as strict with yourself of I want to be there in 3 years, right? Because then if you don't meet that mark, that's going to be harder. So that's where the buffer, I think, can really help.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so we're at 3:30, so I just want to let everybody know or remind everybody we only have 30 minutes left in today's session. I know it goes really quickly. So if you have a question that you would like to ask Melissa, please feel free to come off mute and do that. I get paid to fill the silence, so please feel free to interrupt me. Just make sure if you do come off mute, you're not interrupting Melissa or one of our other attendees who might already be asking a question. And if you don't want to come off mute, that's totally fine. You can always put your questions or comments into the Zoom chat. All right, so Do you think in this post-pandemic environment that a 5-year time frame is a realistic yardstick to use, or should we adapt, adapt our plans to this new context and maybe have 2.5-year plans, 3-year plans instead of 5? Should they be blocked out into, within the next year, within the next 3 years, within the next 5 years? How do you think that this idea or this plan changes because we are now in this hopefully post-pandemic era, but still kind of wading through that?
Yeah, I think, in some ways I like the 5-year plan, in some ways I don't, because I think everyone is going to have a different timeline. And I think the pandemic has kind of made, at least for me, it's made me feel like, not that I've stalled, but it feels like a lost chunk of time in a lot of ways, because a lot of the things that you wanted to do in that time, you couldn't do. And for me professionally, I've been able to reach some of my goals, but personally, I wasn't. So you have to kind of like readjust some of those timelines. And so maybe that means that you don't want to wait, 5 years from now to be able to reach those goals. So you readjust to like a 3-year plan. And I think it really just depends on the person. Some things take time, things like building, your technical acumen, creating relationships. If you're starting a new position, some of that will happen faster than others, but some of that, like in this post-pandemic, if you're still on Zoom, are going to take longer, right? So you kind of have to weigh the way that things are working. You may be able to move faster because of the pandemic. A lot of companies have gone online only, everyone's remote. So you can kind of work for anybody anywhere, which might mean that there's opportunities now that you didn't have before. So I think it just depends on your goals. I'm not super strict on like a 5-year. I think that 5 years is like long enough. I wouldn't go any longer, but if you're more comfortable with like a 3-year plan, that's totally cool too. So don't get stuck on the days.
I agree with that. I mean, I've only had 2 bosses in my, God, way too long, 20-year work history that have ever, kind of encouraged the idea of like 5-year planning, or where do you want to be, going forward, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that did do that were really helpful, because they started with like, well, where do you want to be in a year, then 3, then 5. And then anything beyond that was like, okay, just treat it like a bullet point. What do you want to do in 10 years? What do you want to have done? Travel. And it was one of those things that involved like my whole life, as opposed to just career. Especially because when you're starting out, your career could change, and that's going to change the entire track of your life. Or something in your life could change that changes the entire track of everything else. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, maybe not detail out everything that you think you're going to do for the next 25 years. But yeah, giving yourself those broad guidelines, or broad, a broad idea of where you think you might want to go, can help you kind of make sure that you reorient yourself. And it's okay if you get there and decide you want to move the goalposts. It's your game. You're allowed to make those changes. So yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, one of the things that I did that really helped to kind of solidify like why I had the goals that I did and what goals I wanted, and kind of comes back to your point about creating a 5-year plan that's not just about work, is I created like a vision board, which sounds like a little bit hokey, but it was really good. And I kind of I laid everything out on a board, and I did some arts and crafts. I went to the dollar store, bought a bunch of stuff. And I kind of was able to see from that, like where my goals fell in terms of like personal and professional, and the amount of space kind of represented what was most important and what the balance was. And so I found doing that to be almost better than like writing down my goals for myself, because then I have like this visual reminder on my dresser that I look at every day. And so I can kind of reevaluate by looking at that, whether I'm in the right spot, and that doesn't have a timeline. That's just, things that I want to achieve kind of over the next 3 to 20 years. So I like doing that as kind of a goal creating activity as well.
No, I absolutely love that. And it's one of those things. Vision boarding to me as well sounds kind of like woo woo, but it's like, no, you're thinking about it. You're having a shift, right? In how you're picturing this whole thing, the methods that you're using to create this like roadmap, essentially, changing the media even can be really helpful to kind of help like, not just shake up what you're looking at, but really help you understand. And for me, because I'm sometimes a very pessimistic person, it can start with saying, well, I don't want to end up doing this. Yeah. So, okay, how do I avoid that? it can help also to kind of narrow down where you would like to go. Holly is in the chat asking about methods for learning or expanding your skill set. Now, Holly, pardon me about, there's a bunch of different ways to go about this depending on what industry you're talking about. I'm guessing she was referring to your industry or your field, Melissa. If you're not, Holly, please sing out. But what recommendations do you have? Because Holly, as Holly said, I've got it in my head that you need a degree for everything, and it's not exactly true. There are still some companies that are kind of sticklers and sticks in the mud for it, but there's a lot of places that they would like someone with a degree, but alternative training or boot camps and that kind of stuff can really make up a lot of that difference. So what are some of your recommendations?
Yeah, so I think in my company, you have to have a degree to get hired. And after that, you kind of put the degree on the shelf and it's all about a hands-on learning. So I think for me, some of the things that have really worked are just making sure that I'm getting that breadth. So, when you're in a position, it can be very easy to become a specialist in that position. But if you really want to expand your skill sets, asking for those opportunities that are going to let you work on something new, creating connections, outside of the area that you're working in so that you can start to learn about, like for me, sort of new technologies, new hardware that we're creating, that kind of thing can be huge. Getting involved with like different groups so that you meet other people with different skill sets. So I think for me, it's been less of the sort of educational route, which can still be great. I mean, we definitely have boot camps. I've done some of those, but for me, it's been the hands-on learning has been kind of the best way to expand your skill set that I've found. And it's just about kind of asking for those opportunities or jumping in. If you see that somebody needs help, jumping in and helping them on something, even if you don't necessarily know it, as well as you'd like to get in there. So I think that's my main piece of advice for that one.
I absolutely recommend that idea of like kind of the barter system within your company of like, hey, I know that you know how to do this and I might be able to help with that. Or if somebody comes and asks you like, hey, can you help me with this? Yes, you also know more about blah, blah, blah. So can we like maybe, trade some tips, that kind of thing. The other thing I've heard from a lot of these, a lot of our chat guests is that if you're interested in learning something and you think you need that outside education, like you can't just learn it on your own, check out your free options first. Always try not to spend any money on what you're learning until you get at least get your feet wet, get an understanding, because that way you're not throwing all this money at something that you end up hating. Like once you learn, you don't really want to use that and don't want to pursue it. But it can also help you kind of maybe dial in on what you actually do want to learn about. And then like Melissa had said, there's always ways to reach out and get experience from people. So definitely don't discount boot camps or certifications, that kind of stuff. It's all, very valuable, but try and, kind of do your due diligence and try and make sure that you're not throwing a bunch of money at something that's either that you're not going to love or that's not really going to teach you what you need to know. All right. So this person had wanted to know, as we evolve our career plans with changing technological trends, how can you do that? How can you do both knowing how fast technology changes? Is it like more of a good idea to stick to a domain or a functional area? Or should you really just kind of let the current take you where it takes you?
Yeah, this one I read and I thought it was very interesting because I have a coworker who took, I think, 5-ish years off to raise her kids when she first had her children. And we asked her a question recently, how much have things changed, right? Between when she left, when she came back, and she left sort of the telecommunications industry, came back to the telecommunications industry. And she was like, really, things haven't changed that much. I mean, obviously technology evolves and even the way that we do things evolves, but in terms of the way that we problem solve and even some of the languages that you use, that kind of thing, they don't change that much. So I think it's important to kind of decide based on your own goals, how much you need to go either in depth or breadth in terms of technology. So for me, I'm in the telecommunications industry. And, I keep up on, what's happening in Canada in technology, that kind of thing I find really interesting. But from my perspective, I keep more tabs on maybe what our competitors are doing. Obviously, what we're doing in-house is very important. I think understanding what your company does, what type of projects they're working on, what new technologies is great, not only because it's interesting, but because there could be opportunities there for you as well. So like I ended up on the Waveserver product because I had created a connection with my director. He had given a presentation on it. I thought it was really interesting, reached out to him. So I think it kind of depends on what your goals are, but obviously at a high level, you want to kind of be aware of what's going on, what the impact is to your company, because, depending on the company, they kind of come and go sometimes, and you want to know, right, if, maybe you need to be considering looking for something else, or whether you're with a company that you think can kind of stand the test of time. And so knowing, at least the landscape that you're playing in can make a big difference for that. So if you want to be a specialist, you want to be on a board that's creating the requirements for something, then you're going to want to get really in depth in the technology and everything that's happening. If not, then I think kind of having that high level view is equally good. Sorry if you hear my cat.
No, you're good. No, I completely agree, especially in an area with technology, where these things are going to keep changing throughout the span of your career. So even from a very base level understanding that I have of technology and software and all that kind of stuff, how it all works, you're going to have to keep learning new things throughout your career anyway. So to me, it's more of the idea that you would, take 5 years off and come back and everything's different. That's not a bad thing. You learned how to do this once, and you kept yourself up to speed with how the technology was changing. Personally, I would focus more on those, like you said, those soft skills, or the larger picture of where I want to go. Just knowing that I can either, put in the work and teach myself, or learn as I go for this new skill set, or, I can take an intensive boot camp or something and just clarify that to your employer. Be like, hey, I don't have a ton of, I don't have a ton of experience in this area. Obviously, this is where we're heading. Do you guys, supplement or pay for continuing education classes? Can I look into taking this and maybe use it as, get a work credit for it or whatever? It's the worst thing to say is no.
Yeah. And same thing with conferences. I know at Sienna, we do a lot of conferences. People go to a lot of conferences, and that's a great way to keep up with the technology. And then a lot of times people will come back and present on it. So keeping an eye out for those sessions as well can be huge, because then you can at least hear from someone who did attend, kind of get an idea of what piqued their interest. And then you can follow up on that if it's something that you're interested in as well. So definitely ask, your manager, your employer, if there's opportunities to do that kind of thing as well, if you're interested in the technology side.
So I want to go back to something you had said at the beginning of your answer to this question series, which you said something about how you had built a connection with one of your managers. One of the questions we got a lot was about building these connections, how to make them happen, especially organically, because I feel like it's something that can feel really weird and formal. So what's some of your advice on how to develop these connections, and does it change based on where you are in your career?
Yeah, I'm definitely the person who finds networking very awkward. If you go to a networking event and you're meant to just walk around and talk to people you don't know, that's not really my MO. But so I totally understand. I was asking the exact same question. So one of the things that has worked the best for me is just getting involved and kind of paying attention to what's going on. So my company has a women's ERG, Women at Sienna. And when they were first starting out, they did a mentor circle. And it was kind of at the end of their newsletter, which most people didn't read. You had to email someone to sign up. But I always read all the newsletters, especially when I was starting out, because sometimes I didn't have that many things to do. And I was just interested in what was going on. So I would always be reading the newsletters. And I signed up for this. And that's how I met my current director. So I think if you're not someone who, loves going to a networking event and talking to random people, kind of looking out for these opportunities where you can get involved in something that's maybe a smaller group, then you can start to create connections. And I created connections with people all over our country, all over the world from our company. And that has been really great for my career. And that wasn't my goal when I went into it, but it just kind of happened organically, which was great. So I would say keeping up with that, looking for those little opportunities that are maybe outside of a pure networking event where you can create connections can be huge.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I want to make sure we get to address this other point. So we're kind of jumping around here. My apologies.
That's okay.
But I want to make sure we kind of get to this other point from our themes. This person had asked, when do you know when it's time to leave a position? Are there red flags that you should look out for? And are there maybe different signs when it's time to leave the company versus move up or move on in that specific role?
Yeah, so I think they're both really good questions. And I think this is where kind of the self-reflection that you do on a regular basis around your plans really comes into play. And so I think in terms of the role, the things that stood out for me were, one, I was getting comfortable and I was looking for an opportunity that wasn't happening. And things don't happen right away, but I got to the point of being really frustrated in the role that I was in because the opportunities were not coming and had been like 6 years a month. It was too long. It was too long for where I felt like I had been and where I wanted to go. And I kind of had a frank conversation with my manager at that point, and he said, yeah, I don't have a position for you. So that was a very clear sign that I needed to go do something else. But I think I should have had that conversation sooner because I had been frustrated for much longer before then. So if you're starting to feel that, that's when, maybe having that conversation with your manager can be really important. In terms of the company, I stayed with my company because in terms of my personal values, the way that the company operates really aligned with that. And so I think it kind of depends, if you've done some networking and you've created really good connections outside of your company, it may make more sense to go talk to those people when you're looking for a new position. If you've created really good connections within your company, definitely reach out to them first. I know a lot of companies, Sienna especially, you are rewarded for kind of loyalty, and I've seen them do that since I've stayed with them, which has been great. I know in my industry especially, it's very common to change. And I think it just depends, do you like the company that you work for? Do you think they're a good company? Do you think the CEO is a good person? Are they going in the right direction? For me, a lot of that's around diversity and inclusion and the things that they're doing there. And I've really seen Sienna kind of grow in that area. And that's kind of why I've stayed, is because I really want to see what they do in that space. But it comes back to what your personal goals are and your personal values. And you have to really sit down and think about what those are when you're making those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so to kind of expand on that, you had said that a lot of what you look for depends on not just like the company and the departments and what they're doing in their tech, but it also, encompasses a lot about the company culture, their mission, how committed they are to things outside of their purview, things like social justice initiatives, community outreach, all that kind of stuff. So when you're looking at it in that global idea, how can you take something like this 5-year plan that is pretty like strongly just career oriented and help it align with your personal or family goals? That can seem like, depending on maybe the dynamic you have in your household, you might be assumed that your career goals will be secondary to what the family needs, or it might be a situation where like however your career does is going to determine what opportunities your family has. So how would you assess that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, it depends on everyone's personal situation. So I'm lucky my partner, he's, very professional. We're both kind of in sort of high pressure type roles. We're both, wanting to move it forward. So we support each other in that, which is great. But I think that's where when you sit down and you really do the self-reflection, you have to be honest about these things, right? You don't want to set yourself up for disappointment by kind of making your 5-year plan all about your career if you know that, 30% of your time it's not going to happen. So it's tough to balance. And I know for a lot of the people that I work with, it can be really tough. But I think the other thing to recognize is that even if, let's say right now, the situation you're in, you can't reach that goal that you'd like to reach in 5 years, doesn't mean that you have to give up on it. You can take 5 years off like my coworker did and come back and say, hey, I want to be a manager. And then you can work towards it then. So I think being, a little bit nice with yourself, recognizing where you are now and not feeling defeated if it's not something that can happen right away is a really good way to approach it. And just build those soft skills. If all you can do right now is build those leadership skills, build whatever skills it is that you need to reach that goal, even if you don't think you can make it there in 5 years, do that now, because then you're creating that foundation for your future self, which is great.
I love that. And I completely, I can't agree with you enough about that transparency and that openness, especially with like your family or your partner. Um, one of my favorite things when we were still like, not wedding planning, but like, going through like, Catholics call it pre-Cana, but like it's the lead up to getting married and making sure that you're like making the right choice. And our officiant was really great and asked us to do these like 5-year plans. Now, he had us do it in like bullet list form. We were like at a Panera or something. And it seemed kind of bizarre, but when we did it, we were surprised by how much we were like kind of echoing. We did them separately and then brought them together. And granted, you're in love, you're all Twitter pated, you're going to get married, blah, blah. But like, it was even the places where our goals didn't line up led to really interesting conversations about like, well, why do you want to do this? And like figuring out like, okay, well, you don't really want to do that. You want to do this, or we could also get to that place by doing this instead. And so it made it a lot more transparent, and it like helped us figure out how we could both like how we could get where we wanted and how we could support each other in that way when our goal was maybe not the exact same thing. Or what, we're gonna compromise in this area, so now we don't have to compromise in this one because you're getting your way here and I'm getting my way there. So I would definitely advise like, that open communication.
Yeah. I mean, you can't make progress, I think, in your professional goals without having, the support of the people in your personal life. So making sure there's at least some alignment there, support, whether it's a trade-off, whatever, it has to happen there. And then, going forward together is really the only way that it's going to work.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so to round us out here, we've talked a lot about, kind of the shifting plans and how things change, because last year taught us nothing, it taught us that. So as we are looking at these changes and things, I feel like most people are kind of on the lookout for like bad change, like you get fired when you don't think so, or you get downsized or something goes wrong, right? How do you balance that? How do you maybe like assess and revisit your plans if something goes well? Like you get an unexpected offer of a new opportunity or a promotion or something, like what then do you need to like revisit at like as far as the plan goes?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think because you can't really sit down and say what the future holds, right? Like you can kind of have an idea of where you want to go, but you don't know what's going to come up. And I think that's where you go back to the things that you've written down or you've reflected on, you've put on your vision board of what are, your values and what energizes you. So if the position in front of you, is even if it's maybe a lateral step, right? And this is kind of what I did in my career was I took a lateral step because I could see that in the future, it would benefit me more than where I had been. So you have to kind of sit down and say, okay, this position, it's maybe not exactly what I thought I was going towards, but is it something that's going to energize me, right? Is it bringing in my strengths and the things that I enjoy doing? Is it something that I could see, giving me skills that will lead me to the position I think I want to do? Does it have a path to that? And then from there, you can kind of decide, okay, maybe I take this chance because you might end up liking it more than what you thought you wanted to do, right? When you first sit down, especially when you're kind of new in a position, you can only see so many options. I could see like 2 ways to go when I first started, and now I can see, 5 or 10 or however many. So you don't always know what your opportunities are until they're there. So I think, evaluating it against your values, the things that energize you, and then deciding, will this help me down that path? And if it does, then, why not go for it?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to look at it. Is this getting me closer to what I want, or is this opening up a new pathway that I never really considered because I didn't know it was there, or I didn't think that was something I could get to, or I didn't expect this way to be unexpectedly clear or blocked or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we only have about 7 minutes left. So I want to take some time, obviously, to talk a little bit more about Sienna, but kind of keep breaking down some information for people there. So hold on, let me get back here. There we go. So what you're looking at right now is a questionnaire that we gave to Melissa ahead of today's session. And we like to ask these questions so we can kind of get a better idea of the company that they're working for, right? Because obviously you came here to listen to advice from Melissa about these 5-year plans, but Sienna, like she's talked a little bit about how Sienna has supported her through this. So we want to give you a little bit more information. So you described the company culture as driven, and I know this is really hard to boil down in one word. Everybody says that, and I completely agree. But what made you pick that as the word that really describes Sienna's company culture?
Yeah, I think what I've seen working at Sienna is that driven describes the way that they attack, where they're going to invest, the types of products that they're creating. They want to be at the forefront. They want to be the best in the industries that they play in. But it also reflects kind of what's been happening more on the people side in the last couple of years. They've been really driven to increase diversity and inclusion and to really create like more of a people foundation to the company, which has been really good. And then even just the people that I work with, everyone is very driven, even throughout the pandemic, and people are getting burnt out for sure all across the board, but everyone's been really driven to still achieve the goals that we've set out. And so working in that environment is really inspirational. So I thought it kind of covered all of the different aspects that I've seen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your favorite part about working at Sienna, because there's a handful of answers that are like kind of keep getting repeated here, because I mean, people is important no matter where you go. But you said great opportunities. Can you maybe expand on that and give us maybe a couple ideas of opportunities that you've gotten through them?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I really like about Sienna is, so the company does kind of the full stack, right? We do right from like your GUI all the way through down to the hardware, the chipsets, everything. So joining Sienna, I worked on one product in a certain area, and then when I was looking for something else to do, I could move to a completely different product in a different area. And if I decided I wanted to, go work on firmware or whatever it would be, there would be opportunities for that. So I think that aspect of being able to kind of move around and do something completely different in the same company is something that I think is really unique about Sienna. And they're very kind of open to giving you those opportunities. And I think for myself in my career, I can see that there's a lot of opportunities for me to grow. In my current role, I've been given a lot of opportunities to kind of run with what I've felt is right. Like I kind of created my own role and just kind of ran with it and have leaned on my strengths, and that's been really fun. So from that point of view, I think, whether you are starting or you're coming in later in your career, you're not sure exactly what you want to do, it's kind of a great place to be because you can kind of move around if you end up not loving where you are, which is great.
That is excellent. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your tips for someone who is interviewing. Now, I'm assuming these are Sienna specific, but they might not be. So what are some of your top tips?
Yeah, so these ones I wrote based on my perspective, having done a bunch of interviews and kind of what I look for. But I think this kind of applies to all of Sienna. I mean, obviously, showing your technical acumen, showing that you can problem solve, all that stuff is great. I think for me, what really stands out is someone who, is just themselves, who talks a little bit about their interests, who talks a little bit about who they are, really makes you stand out. And then another thing that I really appreciate is if someone comes in and they have sort of clear goals and they talk about those, because it lets you know, is this position going to be a good fit for them or not? And maybe that your goals are more generic, like you want to be a manager, you want to be an architect, whatever it might be, but you can kind of then know where that person might fit into your team 5 years from now, which I think is really exciting. I like to kind of interview someone and then think about where they will end up versus just like where they're going to start out. So I think talking about goals also shows that you as a person are thinking about staying with the company longer, right? You're not just looking to come in and kind of get some experience and move on. It talks about like you want to create a career there, which I think is really exciting when you interview someone who has that perspective.
No, I think you're very right. Getting that idea can help, really find you the right fit. It's sometimes honestly, and I've been there a lot, where it is just about getting the job. You just need the job. It's, it's the paycheck, it's the insurance, it's the whatever, like you just need it to work. But the roles that I've had that I've enjoyed the most have been the ones that either I could see myself growing with the company or the company helped me see how I could grow with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, the being forward and being upfront with like what you are hoping to achieve or hoping to gain through this, could definitely help make sure that you end up where you need to be.
Yeah.
All right. So we also have obviously some open roles listed with Sienna. I'm going to share their link to their company page here again in just a moment. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these, especially if there's any one of them that you can maybe speak to, somebody that would be interacting with your team, any kind of extra information you can give us.
Yeah, so I think my team, we play more in this sort of senior engineer, software engineer type of roles. I don't think any of these are specific to Wave server, but I do have a friend who works out of the San Jose office and quite enjoys it there when we're allowed to be there. They have great snacks, I can tell you that much. But I think,
love perks like that.
I know, right? They have better snacks than any of the other offices that I visited. So that's a perk for San Jose for sure. But I think in general, like all of our teams are very collaborative. I think, no matter where you were to end up, it would be a great experience. And software development is our biggest driver for sure. So that's going to be huge. R&D is our main bread and butter, and that's where I work, and I've really enjoyed it. So.
Amazing. Well, okay. I just want to say a huge thank you, Melissa, for taking time out of your day to spend with us and, bring your expertise and share your experiences with us. I know that the rest of the group is also very thankful for it, but I just want to say a huge thank you to you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. This was a lot of fun, and thanks to everyone for joining and sticking around. So
good. I'm glad
you got something out of it.
Yeah. And like Melissa said, thank you so much to all of our attendees, everybody that submitted questions before today's event. These were amazing. It was really kind of hard to cut down. And to everybody who added questions or comments into the thread, thank you so much. These events are so much more fun and more helpful when they are like personal. They have that interactive quality to them. So until we're able to, get back to in-person events and take PTF on the road, I'm so happy that you guys are joining us virtually. And also a huge thank you to anybody who is joining us on YouTube right now. You can always watch the live stream if you'd like, but it's so much more fun to join the Zoom because that way you get to interact with us. All right, so to round us out for today, again, huge thank you to everybody that participated, everybody that attended. Hi to future viewers. Hopefully this is helpful to you as well. I hope that y'all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and hopefully you'll be joining us for our amazing chat that we've got coming up at the end of this week as well as next week. We're so excited to have you. And don't forget, we've got our virtual summit for July happening the 12th through the 15th. The theme for that one is Tech for Social Impact. So definitely get a ticket to that if you'd like. It's free, and we can't wait to see you join us. Anyway, that'll round us out for the day. I hope everybody has a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.